So I was in New York City, 15, 16 years old. It was a summer when there was an unrelenting heat wave, day after day, hot, humid, smelly, stinky New York weather. I was working at that time at Metropolitan Life Insurance Company in the third basement. This was their building, which used to be on 23rd Street. They sold it, Madison Avenue. They had 5 basements. And on the second basement, they would feed all their workers at noon, thousands and thousands of them. And all those different pantries would send their dishes down to the third basement. And I was there with a hot, steamy, dishwater kind of sweat. And then I go home on the smelly subway. And we lived in the housing project, Amsterdam Avenue, 62nd Street. You weren't allowed to have air conditioning. And so you would be there, the sun caking those bricks all the day. And it was unrelievable heat. So I got a call from a high school friend of mine, out of the blue. And he said, "Frank, how would you like to go to Lake George?" Any of you know Lake George? Well, look at all those hands go up. Most people don't know Lake George. They think New York is only the ugly city rather than the beautiful lake. And I had this idea of pure crystal water, lovely mountains. I said, yes, I'd love to go to Lake George. So he drove over. His father was a doctor with his mother, picked me up on the west side, over to George Washington Bridge, up the thruway. The Northway had just opened then, and we went to the west side of the lake by Bolton's Landing. And a little bit beyond Bolton's Landing was where his father and mother had just built a house on the side of the lake. Now, for somebody who grew up in the housing projects, this is like, really? They have houses? I had my own bedroom for the first time in my life. You could smell the newly finished wood. Everything was wonderful. And then my friend said, "Let me show you this." Took me down to the side of the lake. Brand new boathouse. And in the boathouse, a brand new boat. And next to the boat, all this water skiing equipment. So I said, "Oh, wow, you guys go water skiing." He said, "Oh, we're all going water skiing tomorrow." And I said, "Well, I don't know how to water ski." And he said, "Oh, don't worry. I'll teach you. It's a piece of cake." So we had a lovely evening, walked around Lake George, went up to the village. The next morning, got up early, had a nice hearty breakfast. Then we went down to the lake, and we put all the water skiing equipment in the boat, and my friend and his father drove out onto the lake. So my friend says to me, "Well, look, let me show you how easy this is. You just sit in the water with the life jacket, of course." I realized that is the most important piece of water skiing equipment, the life jacket. You put the skis in front of you. You have the rope coiled in front of you. And then when you're ready, you wave your hand, and then the boat goes, and you just stand up, and you go on the water. "Let me show you," he says. And he gets in the boat, and he makes this big, big arc all around. And it's amazing. I had never seen anybody water ski. And I said, "Gee, that's terrific." So he gets into the boat, and he says, "Now it's your turn, Frank." I said, "Okay." Put on the life jacket, got in the water. Skis were all set up in front of me. There was the rope that was coiled. I was very, very nervous about this, but I waved my hand. There went the throttle, there went the gas, there went the boat, the rope uncoiled. And nothing happened. I just sat in the water. And so they made a circle and came back around. And we figured out that I was so nervous, I forgot to hold on to the handle. And so the boat couldn't drag me. Let's try again, my friend says. All right. In the water, skis in front of me. My knees are bent, my hands are straight. I'm holding on to the handle. Give the little wave. There goes the throttle. There goes the gas. There goes the rope. And I do the best imitation of Superman I have ever done in my life. Just up and splatto right in the water. Well, they go around again. My friend says, Frank, I think you're getting the hang of this. Emphasize hang, okay. Let's try once more. So there I was very determined. Got in the water, the skis were there, holding on to the handle. The rope was coiled the way it was supposed to be. My knees are bent, my arms are straight. Wave my hand. There goes the throttle, there goes the gas, there goes the boat, there goes the rope. And I am water skiing. Anybody ever water ski? Yeah, I mean, it's almost like flying. There is this incredible sense of being restrained from friction. And there I am in the water. I'm going this way. I'm going that way. I'm looking at the shore, and all the girls are there admiring my wire Italian body. This great sense of ecstasy and exultation, which must have lasted 6, 7, maybe 8 seconds. Because you know what I did? When I was there, on top of the water, finally skiing, I looked down. And as soon as I looked down, I said to myself, oh my God, what's holding me up? And that's exactly when I went in the water. They must have dragged me for 2 city blocks. The skis were flapping this way and that way. My ankles were messed up. I couldn't walk for 2 days. Fortunately, the bathing suit stayed on, but everything else was utter humiliation. But from that, I got one of the important things to think about in life. What is it that holds me up? What is the ground on which I walk? What is the foundation? What is it that supports me in all the moments of my life? Because we don't think about that. We just presume there's going to be another minute, another hour, another day, another week, another year, another decade. People call me up, Father Frank, could we set something up for 2018? Well, if you're alive and I'm alive, we'll see if we can do that. Really, when you think about it, what is it that gives us life and sustains us through life day after day after day? I was working in a parish north of Washington, D.C., lovely parish. Nice people, young people, they could afford to move in there. Lots of families, lots of young people. Everything was great except these people like to talk. So the meetings would go on and on and on. And then I was at one meeting, 9:30, 9:45, 10 o'clock, 10:15. Come on now, let's get going. Finally, about 10:30, the meeting ended. It was drizzly outside. Got in the car, drove down to the corner, forgot there was a stop sign on the corner. So there I am going through the intersection, and I turn and I look, and here are 2 headlights coming directly toward my car. And I said, oh my God, I'm dead. But somehow, I don't know how, I got through the intersection. The next thing I remember, I'm at the side of the road, My body is full of sweat. My heart is pounding like crazy. And I'm saying to myself, I should be dead. How did I live through that? And if that happened to me, what does that make of the rest of my life? Am I not living on borrowed time? Have I not been given more life to live? And I bet half of us in here could come up with situations that are virtually like that. If we'd have turned this way, if we'd have walked down this street, if we hadn't have looked over here, we would have been crippled or we would have died. No, we hear stories about Lazarus. We'll hear this next Sunday at some of the masses. Being raised from the dead. Oh, what would it be like to be raised from the dead? In a way, we've all been raised from the dead. We've all been given more life. We're all living on borrowed time. Every single moment of our life is a precious gift from God. Every single second we have. What is it behind all those moments? What is it that holds us up? A few years ago, I was out somewhere in Duluth, Minnesota, very cold. And I got a little early to where I was going, so I was watching the news on television. And it was the time when they finally reached the 33 miners down in Chile. Remember that story? I mean, it was an amazing story. They had a movie that came out about it. One of my classmates from my novitiate was starring in the movie, but it didn't go anywhere. I haven't pointed that out to him yet. The 33. The miners were 2.5 miles down inside this mountain. And the little tunnels that they went this way and that way, and somehow the rocks shifted between those tunnels and they were trapped inside. And 33 of them made it to a special area where there was a little bit of food, a little bit of mixed orange juice, a little bit of water. And finally, they discovered where they were. They drilled a little hole down there, and the men wrote a little sign, Estamos aquí los 33. Here we are, the 33. And for about 6 weeks, the world stood in suspense. Were we going to get these people out? What was going on down there? Would they starve to death? Would they kill each other out of boredom? Would they kill each other out of anger? Would we get there in time? And they found this big drill, wide enough to make a hole so a whole capsule could go down. And day by day and week by week, that drill got closer and closer, until finally they were bringing up the first of the 33. And I remember looking on the television. Here was this man's wife, his 7-year-old kid. What it must have been like for them all of those weeks to wonder if they would ever see him again. Pulling that capsule slowly up the 2.5 miles. And the whole world is in suspense. What was going to happen here? And finally the capsule comes out. And the door opens. And this man comes out in his late 20s. Walks over, embraces his wife. And I looked at the little kid. He was laughing hysterically. And he was crying. Because his father could just as easily have not been there. His father could just as easily have died. What is it that holds us up? What gives us the time that we have? What is the foundation on which we walk? And this, of course, is the setup to look at the gospel that we had. Peter walking on the water. And what is it that is going to hold Peter up? What would allow Peter to do that? Now, before we look at this, we should put it into a bigger context in the Gospel of Matthew. Right before this, Jesus had just fed 5,000 men, plus women and children in the desert. Who feeds in the desert? Yahweh God feeds in the desert. The manna comes down in the desert. Here is Jesus feeding in the desert. God feeds, Jesus feeds. Jesus is God. And the whole setup that we have and what we read with the wind and the waves and the storm, that's what the ancient writers used to use to show that God was present. Remember those old movies, Cecil B. DeMille? Whenever God appeared, you'd have thunder and lightning and that. Well, that's how they thought back then. And here is Jesus in the middle of this appearance of God. And what does he say when he comes over? Do not be afraid, it is I. The very same name that God says is my name. We heard it just a few weeks ago when Moses says, who are you? God says, my name is I am. So the whole story is about how God is present in our lives and how God is present in Jesus and how God is present especially in the times when we are afraid, in the times of greatest danger. And there are very strange things about this story. Here are these fishermen. They lived on the lake. They had fished there for years. They knew every square inch of that lake. And there they were, grown men, crying and terrified in the boat. Now, they had known Jesus. They had been with Jesus. They saw all the miracles that he had done. And so here they are, terrified in the boat. Oh, we're going to drown, or we're going to die. And Jesus comes walking toward them. And you think the logical thing would be, hey, we're okay. Jesus is here. We don't have to worry anymore. Jesus has come to help us. But that's not what they say. What they say is, it is a ghost. It is a phantasm. It is a fantasy. It cannot be real. Now think about that. There you are. You need the help. The help is right there in front of you. And you don't see it. It's right there. But you can't accept it. There's a famous story, cute little story, about a man during a time when a flood was going to come and had all these warnings out. Get out of your house, the flood is coming. It's the only way you're going to be safe, evacuate. And the man is very devout and he kneels down and he prays to God and he says, dear God, I'm really worried in this flood, but I know you're going to save me. And so the waters come, begin to rise. Policeman comes and knocks on the door. Get out of your house, you're going to drown. Evacuate now. The man says, don't worry. I prayed to Jesus. I'm going to be fine. The next day, the man is up on the second story. The water's flooding the house. Somebody comes by on a boat. Get into the boat, you're going to drown. Get into the boat or else. And the man says, don't worry. I prayed to Jesus. He's going to save me. The third day, he's on top of the roof. The house is completely underwater. A helicopter is flying over, dropping down a line. Grab the line, or you're going to die. And the man says, don't worry. I prayed to Jesus. I'm going to be okay. Well, of course, the jerk dies. And then he goes and he appears before Jesus, and he comes up and he has this big scowl on his face, and he says, I prayed to you, I trusted you, I asked you to help me, and what happened? I died. And Jesus says, are you kidding me? I know you prayed to me. I sent you a policeman. Then I sent you a boat. Then I sent you a helicopter. What is the matter with you? I answered your prayers and you couldn't see it. Now think about your own life. How often you know exactly what it is that God is asking you to do. How often you know exactly where to get the help and strength you need. How often it's totally clear to you, I should call my brother I haven't called in a long time. I should stop using this because it's hurting me. I should give up that kind of pattern. I should spend more time with my wife. I should spend more time with my children. I should spend a little more time every day in prayer. We know exactly what the answer is. But we say what the apostle said. It's a ghost. It can't be real. Not that answer. I want something special. Michael the archangel to appear right before my eyes, and then maybe I'll know what to do. Now the other thing who's very interesting in this story is Peter. What is going on with Peter? We hear the story and we think, oh, what a tremendous man of faith to say to Jesus, tell me, come walking on the water to you. But what does Peter say? If it is you. Does that sound like a word of faith? If you had a heart problem, would you say to your cardiac surgeon, if you are qualified, cut me open? If you had big tax problems, would you say to your accountant, if you can fix my problems? If is not a word of faith. It's a word of doubt. And the other one who uses the word if is the Satan when he tests Jesus in the desert. Then we think, oh, what courage to get out of that boat and walk on the water. But it's not about courage, it's about fear. And why is Peter afraid? Because he felt the wind blowing against him. The wind was blowing from the beginning. The whole story is about the wind. There's nothing new in the wind. It's just that Peter let the wind get into his head. And when that happened, he began to doubt. And that's when he started sinking. And how often does that happen in our lives? Instead of staying focused, instead of being concentrated, instead of opening our hearts in trust to God at a deeper level, we let the winds get in our head. We let problems and issues, we let scandals and gossip start to distract what it is all about. And instead of staying focused on our following of Jesus, we say, oh, so many problems over in that church, so many problems over in that parish, oh, they're all gossipers, they're all this, they're all that. As if there haven't always been gossipers in the church. Where do we see tomorrow when we read about the Corinthians? As if there haven't always been problems in the church, as if there always haven't been scandals in the church. That's what happens when human beings get together. But the third thing, I think, when I read about this passage, there's a little bit of jealousy inside Peter, a little bit of envy. Now remember, when they multiplied the bread, Jesus took the bread, they gave it to his apostles, they broke the bread. So the apostles are doing what Jesus is doing. And I could see in Peter's mind this idea, oh, Jesus is walking on the water? I'll walk on the water. We can be a little twosome, Jesus. You could be number one. I could be number two. You could be Batman. I'll be Robin. You could be the Lone Ranger. I'll be Tonto. And the two of us could make things work. But why can't Peter walk on the water? He can't walk on the water because he doesn't know what it means to go under the water. He can't walk on top of the water because he has no idea what baptism is all about. He thinks that following Jesus is going to be a lark, that following Jesus is going to be this unrelenting high. When Jesus is saying to follow me, means to take up my cross in your life and walk behind me every single day. When we are baptized, we are made one with the dying and the rising of Jesus. I want you to think about this, because this is like the central point of our Christian faith. In fact, our church is taking 40 and 50, 90 days, 1/4 of the church year to announce this. From the beginning of Lent all the way to Pentecost, our message is this: if you will ever come to the fullness of life, then you must be ready to die. In order to find authentic living, you have to learn how to let go. In order to receive things in life, you have to stop grabbing after things in life. Our Christian message, that in order to live, you first have to go through death. Now think how hard that is in our culture. Because what's our culture saying? Study hard, go to a good school, get lots of A's, you'll have a lot of money, then everything will be perfect. Or the more cynical side of culture, be tough, be strong, kick the other person, that's how you get ahead. Our culture is saying everything except the gospel message. It is by dying that we find life. Now you're looking at me saying, what do you mean, dying we find life? But I want you to think about your life. Think about every breakthrough you have ever had. Think about every difficult issue that you have ever faced. Think about every crucial decision you have ever made, including the person you married. Think about your life. And you will see that life again and again as a pattern of dying and rising. I see this so much in seminarians when they get ordained, young seminarians. The first few years, how am I doing? How was that baptism? How was my sermon? Did I do a nice mass? And it takes a while before Father realizes when you're thinking about yourself, Father, you can't be a good minister. It's when you give that up and think of the others that you begin to understand what ministry is all about. Any married people here? Yeah, there's a few. Would you say that marriage is, in a sense, a process of dying and rising? Sometimes it's like, I want to kill the other person, I realize that. But think about it. How often we have to die to ourselves. And when we die to what we want or to the way I think it has to be, to my little perspective, when I open myself to the me dies, and part of me is rising. And when we have children, we can't think about ourselves anymore because little Johnny is crying over there and little Mary needs a diaper change and this one over here and that one over there. The whole process of life is pulling us out of ourselves, putting to death what has to die so that we can find fuller life. Putting to death our egoism, putting to death our resentments, putting to death the stories that we tell ourselves that lead us into dead ends, putting to death our addictions, putting to death that egoism that is floating in our lives all the time. This big fat I that keeps getting in the way and keeps me from seeing the God that is holding me up, the faith on which I walk, the trust in God that is the ground and foundation of my life. This is a big question for us Catholics. Because a lot of people look at us Catholics and they say, they have never been converted. They have never experienced Jesus. They don't know what it is to give their lives to Jesus. Now, how many people have kind of come up to us in the store? Have you accepted Jesus as your personal Lord and Savior? And we go, yeah, I don't know if I did. Did I do that? Every single Mass we do that. Again and again in our lives we are giving ourselves to Christ. So often we feel everybody else has been converted but not us. We just go through the routine. But our routine is a process whereby conversion comes deeper and deeper again and again in our lives. Pope Francis says, to be evangelized is to have a personal encounter with Jesus. And when I hear the gospel, and when I come up for communion, and when I sit in prayer, and when I open my Bible, and when I go and help somebody because they're in need, when I let myself die in order to rise, I am encountering Jesus.